Welcome to Inside the Franchise Growth Engine, presented by Hex Growth, a firm focused on building predictable pipelines, scalable growth systems, and enterprise value for emerging brands. These are real stories from real brands, but we go deeper. Inside the Franchise Growth Engine, leaders unpack the systems, capital decisions, and operational discipline that turn growth into enterprise value. We are excited. On today's podcast is Paul Barron, founder and CEO of The Wall Printer, a technology-driven specialty printing business that allows entrepreneurs to print high-resolution images directly onto vertical surfaces without the need for brick and mortar infrastructure. I've actually seen several videos of it. It's very, very cool. I'm excited for this discussion because this is a fundamentally different economic model than traditional retail franchising as we know it. They lead with lean, equipment-based, margin-focused business. Take it away, Monica.
Yeah. So, Paul, will you give us just a brief overview of your background? How the wall printer evolved from a technology opportunity into a really a scalable business model.
Well, thank you, Monica and Don. We could certainly start with Paul was born at a very young age, but we don't have to bore your audience with that much history.
Yeah.
Suffice to say that I've been in business or worked for businesses or founded my own businesses for some 50, 60 years. And so with that said, I've gone back and forth between founding my own businesses when I found that working for somebody didn't give me the challenge or the opportunity or the information that I thought I wanted to move to the next stage of my life. So I ended up founding everything from retail, sporting goods stores, which I founded as my first business venture right out of college, to be getting into the restaurant business in New York. Then I got into a software when I got out of the restaurant business because what I made in 12 years in New York, I lost in 1 year in Florida. I call those not failures, but learning experiences. Any entrepreneur, or if you fancy yourself to be one, or even any business owner, has to look for peaks and valleys. You're going to have them all. Just as the saying goes, be nice to the people on the way up. They're the same ones you're going to see on the way down. And so my journey has been fairly complete. Right now, I'm at my last hurrah, but I think in my 74 years, what I have now is kind of I guess we'd call it a home run. But at the same time, I'm very proud of where I am and how I got here. And happy to share that with your audience. From the restaurant business, I went into the software development, sold a little software product that I developed in early 1990 to a large company. It allowed me to become what some people would call a communications consultant. So I was hired by a company in Atlanta to help them bring a product to market. All along, you have to learn the hats you like to wear and the hats you don't like to wear. I learned early on that I really like people and sales and marketing. I remember taking a psychology test when I was in college, which is supposed to determine who you want to be when you grow up. My results came out to be teacher, lawyer, undertaker. And so when I asked the psychologist, I go, look, teacher, I'm actually on the teaching track, which was my first job out of college. And I said, lawyer, I like to argue with people, so I could understand that. I said, but undertaker, how did you get that? They go, well, Paul, they really don't distinguish between the type of job. They know that it's your characteristics. Are you good with people? I go, well, doesn't that mean live people, not dead people? But they said there's no distinction. So that put me on the track to know that I really did like people engagement. And that became not only from a sales perspective, as selling companies' products or my own company's products, but dealing with people and then all aspects of the business that's associated with that. From dealing with people, you also have to deal with vendors, you have to deal with partners, you have to deal with the ups and downs of finances, legal, accounting, insurance, everything that goes into a business. And some people like one or more of those hats. Some people like none of them. And maybe they should work for another company, which is fine. Everybody needs employees. I know I've got 20 now, and I'm very proud of them. And they really make the business, not me. I couldn't do it without them, and they, of course, can't do it without my support as well. At least I'd like to think so. Maybe that's not true these days, since the place can run fairly independently, which is the goal that most people have when you get to my age, I think. But along the way, after I sold my software company, I actually got hired by a company in Atlanta to sell their product and bring it to market. I had a competitor that was a Russian company, which turned into a relationship that lasted 12 years. And I got into that relationship because they had the same product as my US company had. Their technology was far superior. Audio, video technologies, GPS, all the kind of cool stuff back in the 90s, and the bells and whistles that were really neat. And we always went to trade shows together, and their booth would be next to my booth or across the aisle. And we talked to the exact same people all the time. And when they, at the end of the day, we'd get together, and I guess the word is frenemies. We'd sit down and we'd have a couple of vodkas together. And the stereotype is correct. Those people can drink their vodka. But needless to say, one day after a trade show, I had just landed a very large account with Motorola, a large US company, if you're not familiar with it, and a communications company. And they sat across from me and they said, flat out, Paul, how did you land that deal? I go, we all know our technology is better than yours. Why did you get that deal, do you think? And I'm very transparent in business and in life. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. But I looked across the table and I said to them, very honestly, you're Russian and I'm not. And there was no disrespect intended in that. What it meant was I understood the American audience. I understood what they were looking for, how to communicate with them. And people buy relationships. People don't necessarily buy products or technology or services. There are lots of lawyers around. There's lots of hamburger places around, lots of electricians, and even a couple of wall printers around. What differentiates you from anybody else, whether competitive or not, is going to be how you treat people. Sure, you have to offer a good service at a fair price. Anybody can do that. Maybe not the good service. That's a differentiator, of course. But if you've got a good product and you can give it at a fair price and you treat people well, generally you're going to have success. At least that's been my experience. And then the converse is true, that if you don't treat people with respect, or you overcharge, or you offer low quality, or you're late all the time, or whatever makes for poor service, that will come back and haunt you as well. So with all that said, I worked for this Russian company for about 12 years, wonderful relationship. I made a lot of money. I licensed their software to companies everywhere from Samsung to Apple to Skype, Microsoft. And this was as a hired salesman, a hired gun, so to speak, but work on commission. I did very well for myself, but I always wanted to own what I did. I always found that there was something I would do different than somebody else. And unless you own it yourself, you're really not going to accomplish that. I remember one of my first jobs early on. I worked for a company in my 20s. I was making more money than I thought I would at that time in my life. That was after I sold three tennis shops that I had founded. And I got hired by this company that was interesting. It was a family-related company. And they wanted me to take over sales management for the company. And so I did. I made a lot of money. First year, Christmas bonus, he gave me $1,000. Now, remember, this was back in the 80s. $1,000 meant something then. And so I was very happy about that. But I said to my mother, who happened to be the bookkeeper for the company, I go, that was really nice. They gave me $1,000 bonus. And my mother said to me, well, frankly, Paul, because of the sales you did for the company, the two owners, they each wrote themselves a checks for $50,000 this year. And I said, oh, that's interesting. So, and I knew nothing about that. And I don't begrudge anybody for getting what they deserve. And especially the risk takers, as I've learned later on in my dealings. That's worth an awful lot. And so I went in Monday the next day and I said, thank you. I'm very appreciative of the bonus you gave me. I go, but I think I'm worth more than that and I'd like a raise. And he looked to me, and I'm going to tell you what he told me because it's hung with me to this day and to anybody who works for me. He said to me, Paul, you are a great salesman. You've made this company a lot of money. You do a great job. I'm going to make sure that you make more money than anybody else will pay you. But I'll tell you this, you will never make what you think you're worth if you don't work for yourself. And so I took that to heart. And I said, thank you. I appreciate that. And I quit. And so I went to work for a competitor of his as an independent salesperson. I worked for half the time, making my own hours, finding my own customers. and I made twice the money, and I was very, very happy doing that. And that led me really to the independence that I've had ever since then. That Russian experience, though, fast forward another 20 years, past restaurants and other things and software development. The Russian company taught me something after 12 years with them, and I did as much as I could for them in the United States. And it was time for me to move on. And so I developed a relationship, I developed a reputation by then as being somebody who can take a foreign company's product and articulate their value in the United States. And so what that meant was, here I took this, as I said earlier, I took this Russian technology, which was very good, but it was more easily communicated to the audience that wanted it by me rather than the people who invented it and developed it. And so at that point, I got a customer of mine was an Israeli company. They had just developed something and they wanted to bring it to market. And they asked me to take it to market. I said, sure, because I had a relationship with them. They were a customer of mine, but the product was horrible. And I told them straight out, I said, I really don't think I can do anything with this. There's a lot of competition in the US market already, and there are products that are far superior to this that do more. And so they appreciated that honesty, and that relationship ended. But in the course of that, other companies had found me, and there was an Austrian company that made a baby bottle that was an innovative design, totally out of my wheelhouse. But the common thread was they needed customers in the United States. They needed retail stores. They wanted to be in Walmart, and they wanted to be in baby products stores and online in e-commerce marketplaces. And so they hired me to develop those relationships. And it got to the point that they were actually acquired by a US company. And then it was time for me to move on at that point. Then there was a Chinese company that had a headband for children, which was really cool. I ended up licensing that product to Disney and Nickelodeon and did very well for that company and for myself. But I was really, really tired of being a hired salesperson. If I saw something I really liked, like these products that were coming to my attention, I wanted to own it. I wanted an equity stake in it, because like that first boss that I had said, if you don't own it, if you're not working for yourself, even though an independent salesperson you might think works for yourself, you don't. You're contingent upon the supply and the quality of somebody else's products. You're not dictating that yourself. And so I retired. And I was looking around, and my wife and I were never lucky enough to have two-legged children. So our children are the four-legged variety. And so we're always looking for things to spend on our dogs. Fortunately, they don't need a college fund and they don't ask for the car keys. So we had a couple of bucks laying around. And so we'd find things for them. Well, I discovered this machine that was a self-service dog wash. It was an 800-pound big machine, 5 feet by 8 feet in size, weighed, like I said, about 800 pounds. It was manufactured in Australia. It was like the old car wash that you drove through and you took a wand and you washed your car and you dried it and it put water and wax and soap and everything else. And then you dried it with towels afterwards. Well, this was a self-contained unit that your dog walked into. It had shampoo, it had conditioner, it had a flea repellent, it had a high quality dryer like you'd get in a hairstylist salon or a car wash. That would dry your dogs, $10 for 10 minutes. Coolest thing I'd ever seen. And I never saw anything like it. Well, at that point, that became my mantra. Why haven't I seen anything like that? I think I'm a fairly normal consumer. Some people may argue the normal part, but as a consumer, if I see something I like that adds value to my life, and I can afford it, I might very well try to purchase it if it means something to me and has some benefits. And so with that said, I started looking for products like this dog wash, and I researched the market. There was nothing like it before. Sure, there were bathtubs and places that you can go into a pet store and wash your dog. You could do it in your own shower and everything else. They all had drawbacks, whether it cost $100 to wash a dog with a salon, or you made your whole house a total mess by doing it at home. All these things had drawbacks to it. This machine seemed really cool. So I reached out to the company in Australia. I said, what are you doing in the United States? They said, nothing. The machine is too big. We didn't want to carry it over. You can only fit 7 of them in a container. It was just too much to bring it over. I said, well, I'd be interested. I said, let's talk. So we had our little courtship. And it got to the point where then I bought into the company and started importing these things. And as I was importing them, and it was fairly successful. I sold a lot to pet stores. I sold a lot to car washes, anywhere people went with their dogs. That was my audience that I identified. Dog parks for cities and communities. So those are my customers. But I could never land the big account. My dreams are always, it's just as easy to sell 100 as it is to sell one of something. And so I could never get into the Petcos or the PetSmarts or the people who would buy 100 of these, 1,000 of these, if they really liked it. And so because I just couldn't get them manufactured and get them here. So if I was going to do something like that, I'd have to manufacture them here in the United States myself. So this is something that was totally new to me, but I went out and started researching manufacturing, and I found a manufacturer that could duplicate this dog wash. And so they did. They loved the product so much that they ended up buying the company, which ended up putting me out of a job and out of realizing the dreams I had for this company, because they had a whole sales team and everybody else, and they really didn't need me anymore. And that was okay. I'm not crying. I did very well financially, but I couldn't take it to the level that I wanted to take it. And so that in itself was then another red flag for me. Make sure you have like total ownership and not just a piece of the action kind of thing. So that led me to the next step. So once again, I was retired, and a company, a German company, who's now a competitor of mine, who, by the way, we've blown out of the market by now, but a competitor, they weren't a competitor at that time. It was a company that manufactured a wall printing machine. It was a machine that printed artwork on walls. And I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen, which again is the first thing that has to happen in my head. Why haven't I seen anything like this before? That's a question I have to ask myself. Is there a market for it? Will people buy it? Can people make money with it? These are all the questions I ask before even considering something, whether it was as a salesman or as an owner. And so it ticked all the right boxes. So we had a little courtship, and we did Zoom calls like this for a couple of months, went back and forth. Finally, they said, Paul, we'd really like you to represent us and bring this to the United States. And I said, well, great. I go, how much do you want for your company? And they laughed at me, and they said, no, Paul, we're not selling the company. We need a salesperson. We need somebody to market this and find customers for this and go that route. And I said, well, I don't do that anymore. And I drew the line, and I said, I'm sorry, if I can't own it, I don't want to be involved. So we stopped the conversation, but it was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen. So I decided to do my homework a little further. I found out not only were there none in the United States, there were only 3 companies in the world that manufactured this type of machine. And the company that approached me, this German company, whose product price point was about twice what mine is today, was a Chinese company, was in the market for about 14 years prior to this German company. They developed the technology. So it was a really cool product, and they had an installed base of hundreds, as opposed to the German company that just had a handful of customers. And then there was one other company. The Chinese don't only copy us. If they see something cool, they copy themselves too. So there was another Chinese company that copied the originator, but they had no development. They couldn't improve upon the product. And so I kind of drew the line there, because the way my mind works, if I see something and learn, I probably will learn what it doesn't do today that I wanted to do tomorrow, because I always learned more from my customers than they've ever learned from me. So when they told me what they want the product to do, I needed a company that would respond to that. Or I'd have to be that company. And so that ruled out the other Chinese company. There was an Australian company and an Indian company. They both had kind of home hobby solutions. My idea for it was to put people in business, entrepreneurs, existing businesses that could benefit by adding artwork to walls, or whether as an entrepreneur or whether it be an existing business like a painter or general contractor or interior designer that could add this to their business and their customer base. So I have a company, because I don't like traveling too much, especially if there's not a beach around. And so I have a company that represented me that always went, whenever I had the harebrained idea that I liked something, they would go and kick the tires, so to speak. Make sure it's not somebody working out of their garage that couldn't do what I wanted them to do or deliver what I wanted them to deliver. And then, of course, there was my wife. You always have to have buy-in from your spouse. And so this was no different. And usually when I say to my wife, hey, honey, come take a look at this machine. What do you think about it? Well, instead of coming to my home office where I sit, I'm in my regular office now, but instead of coming to my home office where I was and ask her to take a look at this wall printing machine, she usually just goes to the bank and cuts out my credit cards and hides the bank account and changes the passwords, because she says, here goes Paul, he's going to buy something crazy. So this time she did take a look. She saw that was really cool. I've never seen anything like it, which is what I want people to say when they see it. And she said, "You think you can do something with that?" I said, "Yeah, I think I can." So she said, she gave me the go ahead, said, "Go for it." So that started a year-long courtship with a Chinese company. And the company went to them. They found out it was a real company with 100 employees. They could produce 50 to 75 of these every single month if needed. And they had no presence at all in anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, and really in no English-speaking countries at all. They were a little bit in Europe, a lot in Southeast Asia, a lot in Australia, a lot in Russia, in the Middle East as well, and some in Africa, basically their backyard. They didn't want to come into the United States market yet. And so they didn't. I'll fast forward, even though by now you realize none of my stories are short. But we did negotiate an agreement where I became an owner, which I'm very proud of. It's unusual for an American company or an American to be an actual owner in a Chinese company. But we worked out a deal where I own all rights to the Western Hemisphere and development rights. I am a co-patent holder on a new printer that we developed since I came on board, which was a floor printer where we print artwork on floors as well as on walls. So the relationship has grown over the 7 years I've been in business. We have over 300 customers. Our nearest competitor, this German company, has 60 customers. So I'm very proud of that. The fact that we have found an audience for this market. And what I'm even more proud of is 2 years ago, 2023, which I guess is 3 years now. But in 2023, my company got selected as Entrepreneur of the Year here in North Carolina. I say this not as a boasting thing on what I've accomplished, but this is a contest where thousands of applicants they get from entrepreneurial companies, startups, and everything else who want to be recognized in whether manufacturing, retail, nonprofits, whatever. All kinds of companies apply, and they pick one company to be the Entrepreneur of the Year award. And the judges are always asked with, what company would you invest $100,000 in? That's what they were asked. We got selected, and the person who introduced me at the award ceremony said, the reason we picked the wall printer was not because we could answer the question that we'd invest $100,000 with him, but this was a company that created businesses for other entrepreneurs who could make $100,000. And so that was exactly what I had in mind. And they recognized that when I created this company, is we don't provide the services. We are the printers, our customers are the business. Today, we are not a franchise. I don't know that I may not be down the road at some point in the future, but today we are an independent business opportunity for people who want to purchase our equipment. We make sure the equipment works. We make sure they're trained. We make sure they get the support they need, that our machines work reliably and well for them day in and day out. But they determine who their customers are going to be. I don't dictate that to them. They determine what they're going to charge. Yes, we give them guidelines. We can give them some guidance based on our experience. But we basically don't control their business, only their equipment that they use to support their business. And so that's the way it is today. We're growing about 25 to 50% year over year. And I've got a great team. God bless them. They come to work every day and they do a good job. And I'm very proud of them. And that's where we are.
Awesome. Thank you for that background, Paul. Really great. So when we think about this business opportunity you're creating for other entrepreneurs, and you look at your equipment in particular, what had to be true operationally before you felt comfortable rolling out this model to the market?
Well, it was always my vision for this model because I didn't want to get involved. And again, like I said, this is a work in progress, whether or not now I find this is best suited as a franchise. And so I'll kind of answer your question this way, which also addresses that point of where I am today. Over the years, we've were very successful, at least I consider it successful, with the amount of printers we were able to sell. And we really never knew who was going to buy this. We wanted to roll it out to people. Again, as I said before, entrepreneurs who thought this was a really cool machine. They didn't mind investing anywhere from $40,000, which, by the way, is what my machine costs, from $40,000 to $100,000 if they want 2 or 3 machines. And they didn't mind making that kind of an investment, but not necessarily for their own business. Maybe they had a child coming out of high school or college, and the parent was or the grandparent was in business in their lives, and the kid had no direction yet. And they said, oh, for this amount of money, I'll put them in business and let them learn their way in the world. So we have some people that are like that, a good portion of them. We have some people that just see this as something really cool. nothing like it in their community. They don't mind being the first kid on the block, don't mind taking a risk on something, because it's not like a hamburger place or a coffee shop or being an electrician where everybody knows what that is and there are lots of them. You just have to provide a better service at a better value to be successful in those businesses. Here, this is brand new. So it does require marketing and finding customers and introducing the product in some way that people understand what it is you're selling. And more important, understand that they want what you're selling. You got to provide benefits to people, not just features. So that's really important that they're able to communicate that. Since we weren't doing that, we weren't helping them find their customers. We gave them some direction if they wanted to deal with residential, with restaurants, with schools, with hospitals, with office buildings. All of these people can be customers for a wall print. Anybody who wants artwork on walls is a customer. And there are only very few ways to put art on walls. So the world was wide open for them. But then as we grew, we found out that half of our customers also had a business already. Well, actually, I'll say 40% are entrepreneurs, 40% are people who have a business, like painters, general contractors, as I mentioned earlier, that see this as an add-on for revenue to their existing business. And the other 20% are people who don't want this as a business, but they want to use the printers themselves. We sold 6 printers, for example, to Amazon. No, you cannot find this on Amazon. You might be able to find some cheap knockoff from someplace. But our printers you can't find on Amazon. But Amazon bought them because they wanted to decorate their warehouses with artwork for their employees. And they had not only the money, but the personnel to do this kind of stuff. And other companies or places like schools. Schools spends tens of thousands of dollars every semester swapping out artwork for either art students or sports teams in dormitories. They're always putting artwork on walls for one reason or another, whether it's for their curriculum or just to beautify the place. And so rather than spend all that money, again, they have facilities managers and things, so they bought the machines for themselves. In fact, this year here in my town of Wilmington, North Carolina, I donated one machine to the Cape Fear Community College that's here, and I donated a machine to UNC, University of North Carolina in Wilmington. I'm very happy to do that. I believe in give back, and they were able to utilize these machines for their own benefit. And plus, it didn't hurt us to have that exposure. So, with all that said, that's what I think I've answered your question. Maybe not, but that's how we've kind of rolled it out.
No, you did. It was great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I love that, Paul. I think that's fantastic. I think something that makes it extremely unique is, that it's equipment based, rather than real estate based. So I'm curious, like, I guess from your perspective, why was that important to you?
I like, great question, Monica. First of all, real estate is very important to me. I like real estate. Real estate is great because, like, now I own this building that I'm in, and even if I sell the business down the road, I'm not ready to do that, but if I do, or if I decide to move into an even bigger facility, the real estate is something I could lease to somebody. It always has value. So real estate is really good, and a good thing to have. In this particular business, because of, number one, the price point, and because of the fact that this is not a business where people come to you. It's where you need to go to them. This is a portable machine. Yes, some of our customers never move the machine out. They do printing on signage, like on metal or wood or tile, things like that, wallboard. You don't have to move the machine to the wall, to a business, to a restaurant, to a school. You can just print on something and deliver that to the place and install it, just like any signage company would do. So you can compete actually with those types of businesses. But I knew that this wasn't a business where people really came to you to see it. You had to go to them to see, let's look at the wall. Let's look at your business. Let's look at your home. Let's learn, what do you like? Is your kid into sports? Does he want, a hockey player on the wall? Does an Italian restaurant want a picture of Sicily on the wall? All these types of questions only get answered when you go and get to know a customer, not when they just come to you and tell you who they are. It's a very important component of this business. So the real estate factor for having a location was not important. So that's I guess, the shorter answer of what I rarely give. But that was the short version of the answer, that real estate just isn't important to the success of this business. Location is not important. Marketing is. And so that was where we really focused, on either knowing how our customers would market, or who they wanted to market to, who they thought their customers should be. That's what we concentrated on more than really locations and the real estate.
So when you think about that, Paul, right? So like when you think about brands that are getting into the market, like you talk about working with all of these different countries and products up front, which I thought was great background. What mistakes do you see emerging brands make when they scale too fast? What are those common mistakes?
Well, the most obvious one is that you haven't researched and you don't understand your market. You know that when I had my restaurant business, I had a very successful restaurant in New York, and I can't remember how much I've said to you already. But early on, what I made in 12 years in New York, I lost in 1 year in Florida, because I didn't research that market. Um, that taught me an awful lot. It taught me about the necessity to research a market and to understand who your customers are. My restaurant in New York was packed 365, 24/7. As long as we were open, we had customers and all year long, no matter what. In Florida, very seasonal. There are the things that I really didn't count on because all I wanted to do was be in Florida to play tennis. So I didn't really research the audience that well, and I suffered as a result of it. And also construction costs and other things that I got involved in on the real estate end that didn't work out for me. So that's really important when somebody's getting into a business, is understanding who your market is. Is there a problem that you're solving? You know, some people get into a business because, look, I didn't get into the restaurant business because I was a good cook. I actually got into it because my partner that I had, one of my best friends, he was in the restaurant business. He knew all about it. I was the money guy, the back office guy, the guy who dealt with vendors and things like that. I got sucked into the business because I loved it so much. And I actually ended up tending bar and washing dishes and cooking after a while. But that wasn't the reason I got into the business. So you really have to know what hats you like to wear. You have to, know the market. And the most important thing, and the reason why customer businesses will fail, is you don't have three very important ingredients. I call it the three T's: time, talent, and treasure. You need the time to really invest in what the business needs to be either created, brought to market, and succeed after that, and to hire the right people, of course. Now, people have asked me before, well, I'll get to that in a second. The second T, time and talent. You have to have the right people, and treasure. You have to have the finances to be able to do it. Some service businesses, you think you can just get into a software development because you have those skill sets. But at some point, you're going to have to find your customers. That may require you going to travel to a trade show or something like that. You have to feed your family. You need an automobile to get to work, or to get to a customer's location. So there's always a need for some type of financial investment. So those three things: the time, talent, and treasure. But hiring the people is also one of the big challenges. Hiring good people and keeping good people. Somebody told me a long time ago, and people ask me all the time when I talk to them, Paul, you seem pretty successful. What makes you success? What makes a good CEO or a founder of a company? And I tell them, well, very honestly, what makes a good CEO is somebody who's smart enough to hire the best qualified people to do the jobs that are needed, but wise enough to back off and just let them do it. One of the biggest challenges is loving what you're doing so much that you micromanage, that you get involved in everybody else. I have an expression that it's not my expression, but one that I use a lot with people here. I say, stay in your lane. When all of a sudden the guy in sales starts interfering with the guy in customer support, or the person in marketing starts interfering with somebody in sales. And so all these areas will work together, but they don't mean that everybody should be in everybody's face all the time. I believe in communication. I believe in, everybody has some value to add, but you also have to stay in your lane and do the job that you are hired for and do it well.
That's a great answer. I love that answer. Okay. Well, as we kind of mentioned earlier, so obviously this show's about systems, decisions, and the infrastructure that powers scalable growth. What system inside the wall printer has had the biggest impact on your ability to scale this business?
So great. So equipment wasn't the problem. One of the first things I did, as I mentioned earlier, so I wanted to make sure I had the proper, reliable, quality equipment that I could sell. Once I established the fact that there is a market for this. So I wasn't concerned about that. What I was concerned about was my customers and my customers' success. Because as I said before, we are the printers, they are the business. So I think this not only answers your question, but kind of leads us to maybe what I see as a real value to an appreciation for you and your audience, is that I've always battled, even though I didn't want to become a franchise, I've always battled with the customers that aren't successful. After all, I'm in the business of selling printers. If somebody buys a printer, that's great. If they don't buy a second printer from me, that means they're not growing. They're not succeeding. If they are, they're buying more printers. And it's always easier to sell somebody who has already bought your product than trying to find somebody new. That's why you give good service in your restaurant, because you want them to come back again. You don't have to always, there are many choices, but I go to the same restaurant sometimes once a week or once every 2 weeks. It's because they do everything right. They do it well, and they do it, better than somebody else. And so, for whatever reasons, but if you're not successful and you're not growing, you can't buy, the restaurant can't buy more food or more booze. I can't buy more printers to sell to my customers. So I'm the struggle I have, and I've had this for a couple of years now, is that when I realized that customers were just starting out, either as entrepreneurs or existing businesses or schools, as I mentioned, and buying the equipment, they weren't successful on the business end, or even successful sometimes using the printers because they really didn't know how best to utilize them. And so that's what I've been concentrating on over the last couple of years. And in doing so, I'm looking at the benefits of a franchise. A franchise, the mantra of the franchise is you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself. Well, that may sound like a trite phrase, but I respect that. One of the reasons I avoided being a franchise is because, well, if it didn't come across in everything I've said to you up to this point, I don't like a lot of direction, and I don't like to be out of control. A franchise is all about control, is all about, setting the standards and setting something, you're a brand, and you have got to be consistent with that brand, so that when somebody comes into your restaurant here in Wilmington, North Carolina, and then they go into that same restaurant in New York City, it's the same experience. And so that's something that I can't say that my customers offer. They don't necessarily offer the same experience, and for many reasons, not only because the printer's not working, but they're going after different customers. They're going after different markets. They might be marketing in a different way. Whatever their reason is, it's not always the same. And so there's no consistency. And I also can't create a national brand, even though we have millions of impressions on social media and hundreds of thousands of followers to our YouTube and Instagram and other channels that we have. We really, are proud of that, because that's the only way we've marketed so far, is through social media channels. And so that's been not only economical, but it's been a great way to get the word out on something that nobody's ever seen or heard about before. But at the same time, there's no national presence. We have national exposure because we market everywhere from Canada to South America to the Caribbean and all throughout the United States. But it's the wall printer, and the wall printer itself, that name doesn't benefit my customers. I would like it to, because one of the things we do is we customize every one of our printing machines that we sell with the company name and brand and QR code and contact information and email address of our customers. It's their business. I'm the printers, they're the business. So if somebody wants to call themselves New York Wall Printing or Des Moines Art, they can do that, and they'll create a logo and they'll create a brand, and we'll put that on their printer so that when that printer is out there, people will see it and they'll scan the QR code, or they'll take down their website or something like that. And that's how they'll contact them, not because they saw a TV ad for the wall printer from a consumer basis, because we're only marketing the machines. We are not marketing the services. So we're not benefiting our customers' growth, because we don't market the service at all of how beautiful this will be on your wall. That's not what we're doing. But I'm beginning to think that's what I'd like to do. And so it may have to be through a franchise model. When it doesn't have to be, but I think it might be best served that way, not only for me, but for my customers that I want to see succeed. So that's the biggest challenge I've had, is making my customers successful.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for sharing that. And that's a great point too. Obviously, if we started to talk about ideas with the franchising model, that'd be a separate whole new podcast for that. Any last thoughts, anything that you'd like to share, with the audience about yourself, your business, the future?
Well, the future is bright for everybody.
It is. That's right.
Let's hope it is, if you don't listen to the news.
Yeah.
But Look, I don't make these things sales pitches. I really don't care if anybody that's listening to this even considers ever buying a wall printer. I give back, and I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back. I just know that what you give always comes back to you. I'm a mentor here at the University of North Carolina's Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. We help local businesses who want to find their own way or to determine whether or not their idea really has legs to become a business. I do that with a bunch of other people that have their own skill sets in maybe legal, patents, marketing, sales, insurance, whatever, finance, and we all get together and help other companies that way. I enjoy, as I said earlier, I learn more from my customers and from other people, I think, than they learn from me. I only know so much, and chances are I've forgotten most of what I've learned. And so if people want to reach out to me, I'm always happy to connect. You can always find me on LinkedIn. My name is Paul Barron. I'm always happy to connect with people. And if you think that there's anything you want to talk about, not anything to do with the wall printer or this particular business, but just business in general, or entrepreneurship, or your own journey and your own challenges, I'm always happy to do that. If people want to learn more about us, very easy. Go to thewallprinter.com. Thewallprinter.com, 15 seconds on our website or on the YouTube channels we have. You see a video of these machines working, tells you everything you need to know about what I do.
That's right.
So again, I'm happy to talk to anybody about anything from buying or investing in their own business or their own challenges to what I'm doing and where I'm going and how I got here.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. That was amazing. Yeah, we did look, Monica and I did look at the technology, and it's really neat. It's very clever. Yeah, we love the concept. This has been a great podcast interview with Paul Barron from the Wall Printer. And I think we'll call it a cut, right, Monica?
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure.